And thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Welcome. So as you hear, my name is Pete Burgis and I'm a Foley artist. I think before I talk about myself or my job, it's important to tip the hat at where that name comes from, because Foley does not describe what I actually do for a living. Foley is a surname. So I need to take you back nearly 100 years. Actually, we're going to be coming up to the 100-year anniversary of a gentleman called Jack Foley. Now, he's credited with being the pioneer of the art form of Foley. He worked for Universal in the late 1920s. He had worked for radio as a sound man, but had moved on to film. Now, Universal at the time had just made a brand new version of an animated book called Showboat. Now, it was silent, unfortunately, and the film industry at the time were just beginning to get a grips with the technology for sound. Unfortunately, around about the same date that Showboat was supposed to be released, Warner Bros. Released The Jazz Singer. That completely changed the viewing audience's idea of what films should be, and sound was born in films. Now, Universal realized that they had a bit of a problem with this silent movie. They'd spent a lot of money on it, and they had to change it. They were going to lose money. So they delayed the release of the film. They were very lucky in as much as there was a musical of the same adaptation on Broadway at the time. So they got the Broadway cast. They recorded a load of songs. They reshot certain scenes in the movie to put the musical numbers in, reshot some scenes for dialogue, and then Jack Foley and his team went into a studio and projected the film onto a screen, and then Jack re-performed what the actors were doing. Now, back then, technology wasn't what it is today, so he had to do everything in one track, and everything had to be in sync. And so it was a definite art form. It was a bit like dancing and using choreography in order to keep in sync with everybody. Very quickly, the rest of the industry realized that this was an excellent way of producing sound for film. And so everybody joined in, and that's how film sound was created. They would use whatever sounds they could capture on set, but generally they would be recording for dialogue on set, and then the rest of the sound would be created by a Foley artist. Now, fast forward to the early 90s, which is where I came in. And fortunately for me, in a similar way to Jack, I was right on the cusp of a change.
Now there are London universities.
Oh, sorry about that. There was a change in technology. So we had been recording on 16mm mag and on multi-track tapes, and then computers happened, which totally and completely changed how we recorded Foley. Suddenly, instead of having 3, 4, or on a 12-track Tascam, you had 12 tracks. You had as many tracks as you wanted. I got a job as a runner in a little sound house in Barnes, and I didn't know anything about Foley at all. In fact, I wasn't trained. I didn't go to uni. I just was very interested in film and television and decided to try and get a job in that field. I remember my first day, actually, and as I was walking down the corridor, being introduced to people and being told about the company and what they did, we walked past a room. It was a converted garage. And the owner had said to me, oh, that's the Foley room. They're working on a program called All Creatures Great and Small. It didn't mean anything to me at the time. I didn't know what Foley was. I just assumed they were doing something to do with television. And my job was actually to train as a recordist. So I didn't spend very much time in that space for the first 6 months or nearly a year while I was learning to record. And then on my first recording session, I was recording Foley. And I knew instantly that I was a rubbish technician and everything I wanted to do was what these people were doing. And so I started asking questions. I started watching them rather than concentrating on recording. I was concentrating more on what they were doing. The way they were manipulating their bodies, the way that they were using the surfaces they were walking on to create forward movement was so interesting to me and so exciting that they appeared like dancers. They were following choreography and they were using multiple sound effects on the table. It was very, very exciting. So I started practicing. And that was the other thing that I was told by the artists generally, it takes so much practice to get your muscle memory changed. A little bit like a dancer, you need to learn how to move around and how to create a forward moving sound when you're actually limited for space. So I practiced. I went to stunt courses. I went to dance courses. I tried everything I possibly could to improve my timing and to improve my physicality when I came to performing things. Unfortunately, after 3 years of doing this, the company, it was in the early 90s, maybe 94, there was a huge recession. We were all made redundant, and I had the choice. I could either be a mediocre recordist or I could be a brand new Foley artist. So I went for the Foley. I was still fairly inexperienced, but I was very lucky, and luck plays a huge part in the film industry. That idea that you're in the right place at the right time and you meet the right people is very important, and it can change a person's career if you meet the right person at the right time. So I met a woman called Pauline Benyon, who was a Foley artist at the time, very successful. And she very kindly took me to all the little independent studios that she worked at, introduced me to people, and my career kicked off. It's a very slow process because part of Foley is it takes a long time to pick up lots of objects, hear what they sound like, think about what else they could sound like, and then remember those things. So you need quite a big sound library in your head before you even start. I was very lucky with the people that I met early on. One of them was a chap called Campbell Askew, who was a supervising sound editor. And within a few years of me working as a Foley artist, I got offered a job on Band of Brothers. Well, that totally and completely changed everything as far as my career was concerned, and me as an artist, because the producers and the premise of that program was to make it as realistic as possible. And the executive producers were actually the surviving members of Easy Company. So there was an overall feeling on the team that it had to be authentic, it had to be emotional, and the producers really wanted the sound to be up close so that the viewer got a real sense of what it was like running through the dirt and through the mud. You know, you can almost feel the dirt coming through. And I remember the editor many times, he'd say, no, more debris. I really want people to be looking away from the screens at this point, like the dirt's going to come through. And so in a kind of documentary style, we created the soundtrack for Band of Brothers. I hadn't worked that way before. Things had been, like I said, fairly limited, but we shot Band of Brothers at Shepperton Studios, which was owned by Pinewood Studios. Massive room with loads and loads of space. And the way you get those kind of sounds, those very big dynamic sounds, is to not use tricks, is to actually physically perform them. So my partner and I at the time, a lady called Andy Derrick, we would don the whole kit with the bags, the guns, I mean, really physically perform. So that colored the way I was as an artist. I carried that on for every job that I've worked on since then, this very physical, direct performance from what the actors are doing on screen to what I'm doing in the studio. And it creates a much more dynamic sound. So I've been very fortunate with that technique and with the few people that I worked on. The Foley editor on Band of Brothers was a gentleman called Derek Trigg, and probably at the time, one of the most respected Foley editors in the British film industry. And the next job he had was Harry Potter. And he invited myself and Andy to work on. It was the second Harry Potter in the series and the first Harry Potter for me. And again, it just turned my career from being a normal jobbing Foley artist into being a film Foley artist, and one that was in very, very great demand. I eventually, after those, maybe 10 years later, my CV was blossoming and I'd learned a great deal of skills. And so my ideas were useful for every genre of film, not just magic and not just war. And I was offered a position at Pinewood Studios as the lead Foley artist, working for the new facility, Creative Audio, run by Glenn Gathard, which I ripped their arms off, obviously. It was a lot of my clients, my freelance clients used to take me to Shepperton anyway for the space and for the studio. So it was a very natural process for me. It was early days for creative audio, so there was only 2 or 3 of us working in those first couple of years, while Glenn got in some new editors, got in assistants. I got 2 new Foley artists to train and work with. And after 5 years, we created Creative Audio, an amazing, amazing sound facility that worked on film, television, and games. In that time, we were approached by a film director called Daniel Jewell, who was obsessed with Foley. He'd seen it, he'd heard it in some of his films, and he'd worked with Foley artists, but he wanted to make a film set in the studio with no dialogue, just a direct translation of what a day in the life of a Foley artist might look like. So we shot it, and actually I think we've got a couple of clips of it that I'd like to show you now, and then maybe I can talk a little bit more about the process of Foley and the way you handle spots. Okay, here we go. Enjoy. Lovely. Well, so this is why I like this film. I love this film. It's such a direct translation, and it saves me talking for hours about the actual process of Foley. You can see it so clearly. We go into a studio, we gather the props together, and we re-perform in sync exactly what is happening on the screen. Now, you can see on there, we're using various different props. In fact, it's not really about the prop when you're thinking about sound for Foley, it's about the sound that the prop makes. And so you see on there, there's a piece of blue paper that Susie is cutting open for the fish. Well, we didn't actually record any sound on the day that we filmed that. So that sound that you're hearing is actually the sound of me cutting a fish 6 months after the film was filmed. But it's, like I said, it's such a lovely example of the kind of things that you have to do. Now, it was shot at Shepperton Studios, which had the biggest prop collection that you could ever imagine, of hundreds of just lots and lots of different things that make noise. I didn't need all of the things that I've got on this table. This actually on the table is the contents of my Foley bag, believe it or not. There are so many things here. I didn't realize I had so many objects in there. But if you weren't working at a studio that had a massive prop collection, as a Foley artist, you probably would be asked to bring along a Foley bag and probably a bag of shoes as well, so that you could at least make a start on character, on some of the things that characters within a movie might be handling or accessorizing themselves with. In fact, before I go onto the table, why don't we, Peter, why don't you pick a genre of film that I could talk about?
I think, why don't we go with disaster movies? Everyone likes those.
They do, and it kind of covers a whole range of things, I guess. So what we would do, we'd sit and watch either the whole film, or we'd break it down into sections, maybe 15, 20 minutes each. And whilst I'm watching those sections, I'd be thinking about the things that I have in my bag, or the shoes that I might be wearing. So we've got a disaster movie. let's say that some of it's set in a hospital, some of it's set in an army barracks, or maybe even a police station, and we're interacting between those characters. And obviously there'll be domestic scenes in there as well. But we'll start with the nurses and the doctors, and we'll start with the grind up. I quite like to record the feet first and all the footstep noises, so I get to see this. I get to see the film 2 or 3 times before I actually come to do the more intricate sound effects and the spots. So I'd start with the shoes. Generally, nurses and doctors, they're going to be in a soft pair of shoes that you can wear all day. So I'd pick a simple trainer or a simple soft-soled shoe to wear, and the fabrics they're wearing, again, are going to be soft and comfortable. So I'd probably go with a light material like a pajama, a brushed cotton or something similar, a cotton shirt. That would be their uniforms. Maybe a doctor would have a slightly flappier coat, but generally that would be their uniforms. And then I would think about accessorizing those uniforms. So what kind of things would doctors and nurses be coming into contact with or carrying on their person? Well, obviously doctors and nurses, stethoscopes and equipment, blood pressure equipment I've got there. I think a stethoscope in here, and actually a lovely noise, just coincidentally. If you're listening to somebody's heartbeat through a stethoscope, there's a lovely trick with just a piece of fabric that you can use to make the sound of like a monitored heartbeat. It doesn't quite work for a full-on heartbeat, but through a monitor, it sounds absolutely lovely. What else would a nurse come into contact with, or a doctor? Definitely in a 21st century movie, lots of PPE. So I have loads of that here, actually. Most of it's for personal use, but as we're doing a disaster movie and talking about nurses, it comes in handy. Surgical gloves, rubber gloves, if it's a viral disaster that's gone on, you might actually need a hazmat suit. And generally things like drips, anything that they're going to be altering, or equipment. I have little bits and pieces like that in my bag that would help and inform you. I've also got a couple of first aid kits, so any kind of packaging or bandaging that they do, I've got access to as well. What else might a nurse have? If it was period, or if they were going to surgical, I could use my dog dish with a few well, I've got a couple of spoons and a knife, but who knows whether it's a scalpel and a pair of scissors. We could use something like that. And then some pills I've just seen on the table. We could have a bit of that in there as well. Now, army or the police, we could go there. Now, if you've got army and police in a film, they're generally going to be wearing very similar kind of costumes. Although they look quite different, they're generally made of the same stuff. But what I would try and do, depending on who the lead character was, say the lead character was in the police force as opposed to the army, I would make them the stronger kit, but I would make them sound slightly different. So the police, maybe I'd go with something like this, as that you don't need all the pockets and all of the equipment on you. What we're generally doing is making a general sound. So if somebody was to go into a pocket and pull out a gun, we'd probably record that separately. But these kind of things, it's a generic sound. So the police, I'd use something more like this shiny material, a whipstock material, to add, and it sounds good as a stab vest, and it's got a bit of a jingle. And it's nice and bulky, so you could make them sound big, like a SWAT policeman. And then if I was going to go onto the army, just to make them sound slightly different, I might pick up more canvassy based materials and add a little bit of jingle. Just so that there's a slight difference. It's still weighty, it still sounds like accoutrement and accessories, but it just sounds slightly different. So if you've got both of the characters on screen, they don't all sound the same. That's those. Now, again, army, they will have guns, they'll have equipment and things. So I always carry a handgun with me, a metal one and a plastic one. The plastic one comes in handy for tasers and things like that the police might be carrying. Metal one's very handy for guns. Now, I don't carry a large gun with me because I could get arrested for carrying that around. So you would either ask the studio for those kind of bigger weapons or a helmet, anything that I haven't got. The studio would either have to hire in, or you can start putting guns together. So you could put plastic gum, maybe tape those together just to increase the volume and sound of your smaller weapons. What else might they have? I've got some dog tags just sat here on the top of my jewelry. That's a good army sound for sure. Sunglasses, you've always got a soldier in a pair of sunglasses. Communication devices. I've got lots of little radios and things. They've got nice little clicks to them. So a policeman on his shoulder radio, nice little sounds like that. Telephones, laptops. Again, in a hospital or with the police station, you tend to get a lot of stationery, photographs of victims or photographs of the tsunami coming in or whatever. So I've got a stationery department. And that's kind of how it works, you know, domestically. Most of these sound effects can be used for so many different things. They don't necessarily have to be the army. My rucksack could be a school bag. If I put my stationery in there, then I'm a school kid or somebody at college. So the same props work for lots of different scenarios.
Thanks for that, Pete. And first of all, you know, well done on winning a double Emmy for your work on Band of Brothers. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Foley art for that series?
Yeah, of course. So anyway, like I said, we were talking about the army. The thing about Band of Brothers was, obviously, it's a true story. And the executive producers for Band of Brothers were actually the surviving members of Easy Company. So we had an amazing reference when we came to work on this program. Now, the producers wanted a very specific feel to Band of Brothers, and that was a kind of semi-film documentary feel. So they wanted to be very close to the action, and Foley was the best way to do that. Rather than try and sound design absolutely everything, it was easier and much more dynamic to actually record a lot of Foley, and in a slightly different way to the way that we had recorded Foley in the past. Now, generally in a studio, you'd have a reasonably restricted space to work in, but we shot Band of Brothers at Shepperton Studios, which is much bigger. And so I had a lot more space to work with and to really generate those kind of dynamics of people running across the field, panicking. We needed to really move. So there were times that Andy, Derek and I, who was the Foley artist that I worked on the program with, we were in full kit, full army kit, all the bags, the helmets, everything to get that really, really dynamic sound of somebody running. Incredibly physical job. The biggest learning curve I've ever had. I had to completely change the way I performed, completely change the way I thought about producing sound for film or television. Like I said, it was very emotional. A lot of the sound effects we were doing were connected directly to narrative or directly to a character. So we tried really hard to make it sound incredibly real.
Thanks for that, Pete. That's very illuminating. And on the subject of the army and something tangible, I'm sure people in their mind's eye can understand what you're saying about the sounds you're creating. But how do you create sounds from mythical creatures that are unique to a film, creatures that don't even exist, such as the Harry Potter films? You know, who decides what a fictional sound should be? Is it the director, the writer, or does the Foley artist have a hand in that?
Well, it would never be the Foley artist that made the final decision on what these creatures would sound like, mythical or any other type of creature, really. Harry Potter obviously has lots of references in the books, and Fantastic Beasts too. There's a book describing the creatures very clearly. The director and the writers will have a say. The producers also will have a say, but they wouldn't talk to me as a Foley artist. There is a hierarchy within film, and I work directly with the supervising sound editor, who works directly with the post-production supervisor. So any of that kind of discussion would be filtered down through those guys or women and then arrive in the Foley stage. Now, like I said, it's not really the Foley artist's job to create the overall sound for a mythical creature. There will be a great deal of sound design added to those creatures as well. It's certainly any vocal utterances would be sound design, and any big wing flaps and things like that would probably be sound design too. The Foley artist's job, however, which is just as interesting as creating the sound of the creature, He's actually placing the creature in its environment. So rather than worrying about whether it had cloven feet or clawed feet, I would be more concerned about how those feet reacted to the surface that it was walking on, or if the creature bumped into anything, how that affected it. So that would be more the Foley artist's job, to place the creature within its environment. And then on top of that, if somebody was to touch the creature or, you know, pet it in any way, we'd probably add something to that. The hippogriff, for instance, all we really had to add to the hippogriff was the claws on the front of his feet when he was on concrete, and shells on the back of his feet for the cloven sound, and then some feathers on his nose as Harry and Hagrid touched him. So it's never going to be a Foley artist's decision to make.
That's great, thanks for that. We're just getting a few requests to speak a little bit louder. A little bit
Oh,
more
okay.
volume.
I do beg your pardon.
So we've had quite a few questions in on the same theme about what was the most unusual method you've used to create the most common sound?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's so many. I mean, even just on this table alone, there are several very unusual things to me anyway, even to this day. So here, it's a very common thing. It's a sock, but it's got corn flour in it. And we use corn flour to add to the sound of snow. So you can hear that lovely creak of snow. And that would add to the first kind of impact on the surface of the snow. But that's corn flour. You make gravy out of it. And it has this amazing, amazing sound that is so like snow. So there are lots of, not so much unusual things, but just other common things that make the same sound as other common things. A really classic one, actually, that's just here. Coconuts for horses' hooves. Who came up with that idea? I mean, it's crazy to think that somebody was sat one day thinking that they had to make the sound of a horse, and so they chopped up a coconut to see how that would work. And that is how Foley sound works. There is nothing specific that equals the sound of something else. You have to pick things up and listen to them. So kind of everything that you do in Foley is an unusual object that's being turned into a common sound.
Thanks for that. So we're about half an hour in, so we've got some time now from questions from the viewers on Zoom. We've had a few in. So we've got one here from Edward. In terms of working on games, along with the Foley creation, do you also implement your sounds, or is this passed on to others to implement? And if the latter, what is the communication like between you and the implementers?
Well, working with any company that isn't your own. So if you're actually providing a service or providing Foley for anything, then you're equally, responsible for your parts. I don't implement my own work. I don't implement it in film. I don't edit it myself, and I don't implement it in film. And I certainly don't do it in games audio. What generally happens is the games audio team would rock up at the studio. They would arrive with a really comprehensive list of assets or cinematics that they want to record. And we would then work through those, recording them. And then I would hand over that sound to one of the guys from the game audio company to edit and then implement it. Actually, at Creative Audio, we could do both things, implement the sounds ourselves and edit them. We often did, but that was never my job personally. I like to stick to the physical performance, the actual showing off, rather than the technical.
Lovely, thank you. And from Robin, what's the hardest sound you've tried to record, and how did you achieve it?
Well, again, there are so many hard sounds to record. I think that it's not that sounds are hard for me to record anymore. I've been doing it so long, and my head is so full of sounds that it's a very natural process for me now. So I don't find things hard. I think what I find difficult sometimes is the amount of choices that you might need to give somebody. So for instance, like when we were doing Fantastic Beasts and the Kelpie, that could have been an absolute nightmare of splashes and seaweed and things. But you don't. You bring it back down to like the common denominators. And so we really just produce the water. Actually, I've gone a little bit off track. What was the question again?
No, the question
so
was,
sorry.
what's the hardest sound you've tried to record?
Yeah,
and then
so
how did you get
not,
around
I
it?
mean, there are no hard sounds really. It's just complicated sounds, but you can break them down now into so many small sections and so many layers that there aren't really any hard sounds anymore. I'm sorry if that's a little bit boring.
You've been around long enough that
yeah,
sounds are no longer hard.
And actually the techniques that we use and the way that we record, if a sound is too complicated, like a train coming off a train track, that's going to be split up into maybe 50 different tracks. So although it looks very difficult to record, and if I tried to do it in one track, it would be almost impossible to do. We don't. So I don't ever have hard sounds, I'm afraid.
And then thanks to Rebecca for asking, do you ever work at studios other than Pinewood, Shepperton? And do you know how many Foley studios there are in the UK?
I don't know how many there are in the UK. Like I said earlier, I did actually take a full-time position at Pinewood Studios in 2015. And so I didn't work for any other companies while I was working there. I was based at Shepperton. But previous to that, in my freelance career, I worked absolutely anywhere. There were dozens, literally dozens of studios that either had a purpose-built room or had rooms that you could record Foley in. They'd build their own traps in wooden trays with gravel in them, and they'd bring them into an ADR room and you'd work in there. So I mean, I don't know how many are left, probably few now after the evil COVID pandemic, because a lot of companies have obviously had to shut down. I don't know. It's going to be a new world, actually, as we move forward in the industry to see who has survived and who's left.
Yeah, I think you're right. An interesting question from Jan. How often do you record outside of a studio? Would you ever record it out in the open?
Yeah, field Foley is something that I've done often. On Gosford Park, for example, we had access to the manor house that they filmed Gosford Park in. It wasn't Gosford Park. It was, can't remember the name of the house actually, but it was a big old country house. We went there and we shot all the interior footsteps on the actual sets, which was a proper country house. So yeah, and I'm working with a company in Germany at the moment called the Foley Factory, and they have a pond in the garden. They're in the middle of the German countryside, so it's absolutely deadly quiet. They have a pond, they have a swimming pool, so we tend to do a lot of water work out there. They also have a little forest connected to it, so I've recorded footsteps there too. It's a very easy process. You just put the film onto a tablet and you go. Obviously there are problems with recording outside as far as interference from other noises are concerned, but generally, yeah, we can do Foley recording outside as well.
Thank you. Now we've got a couple of technical questions. I'll take the easier one first. How do you make the classic punch sound, I suppose, when you're in a fight?
Yeah. Well, there are lots of ways of doing this. There's lots of libraries out there for doing it. But for me, my technique, I like to do a double punch. So I hit my chest. I don't know whether you can hear it, which for me would give me the kind of bassy body element. And then I'll do the same thing, but I'll use a hand. So that would be the high transient thing, and then edit those two absolutely together. And rather than it sounding like a slap every time, it sounds much more like a punch. And I can move my hands to different parts of my body to get a different kind of hollowness on my body, or not if it's solid. And so I tend to do punches on myself. But then there's also punch bags. You can build up a bag and put some fabric in it and punch that for a nice bassy body punch as well. But personally, I like to hit myself.
That's really interesting. Now we've got a fan of the action film here. Slightly longer question. So when working with guns specifically, how often do you get recordings done remotely in the USA when particular weapons are required, down to the sound of an empty shell hitting the ground, as opposed to recording here in the UK, where you may have to make do. You may be a little bit more limited with something that can just be passed off as the sound that you're trying to recreate?
Well, there is no difference between Hollywood and the UK film industry. We're not the second-class citizen. and we don't do things any less. So at Pinewood for sure, and for lots of companies, if the gun sounds have to be incredibly specific, like it's the specific make of gun, we can either employ an armourer, like they do in the States, to come in with the weapons, and they'll do all the cocks and they'll do all the, and we actually at Pinewood, we could even fire the guns as well. So we could have a full gun session connected to the film or the game. And earlier when I was rattling around the guns, that was purely as an example of how to make a gun sound ad hoc. But if the guns were really important to the film, we'd either hire in the proper guns or we would get an armourer in to do them. So the cocking sounds, the handling sounds, any of the switches would be original and possibly done by the sound designers. And then the shells bouncing on the floor or firing out of the gun, they would be taken care of by the Foley artist. But there is no difference between Hollywood and the British film industry now. And I think that's technology that's done that.
Thank you. We've got an aspiring game audio artist here, Max, who's asking, a lot of game sound designer jobs nowadays require applicants to have experience working on AAA games with very few junior roles available. What advice can you give to students and graduates looking to get into game audio permanently without having to rely solely on freelance work?
Write to everybody over and over again. Do not let anybody get away with saying no. If you want to join a team, really think about what it is that you have to offer. Maybe do a couple of extra courses that you think might enhance your skills, specifically towards the company that you're going for. You know, if the game company makes a specific kind of game, then maybe learn some skills that are going to be involved in that game. Maybe learn some Foley skills so that you're not just a technician. And if you are asked to create assets or create some sound effects yourself for the company, you could go in with that ability to come and do the course that I'm about to do that we're talking about. And I'll teach you how to do assets so that when you go in there, you're already qualified to do it. But I think persistence is the key, and practice and study, and really target the people that you're suitable for. Don't just flood the market and then be disappointed that you've had 100 replies saying no. Actually focus on the area you want to go to and pursue that.
Thank you. Now, my pronunciation.
Oh, be nice. Be lovely to everybody that you meet, because that is something that's missing in an industry that is full of people with egos. It's really nice when you just get normal, happy people to work with. So be lovely and take that through your whole career.
That sounds like good advice. Interesting question here from Honey. I mean, clearly you've got credits coming out of your ears of films you've worked on, but Honey's asking, is there a film or a TV show you wished you had done the Foley on, and why?
Yeah, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Because I just think it must have been so much fun. And it's been aired, actually, hasn't it, recently? And I watched an episode and did kind of think, yeah, that would have been a great program to work on. But actually, I don't, because I'm so involved with film and so involved with sound. I tend not to use film or television as my relaxation device. So I don't really see that many other films or that many other TV programs. I think, what have I watched recently that I really wish I'd worked on? Actually, there's a German Netflix program called Dark. And generally the sound effects were fantastic, but the footsteps weren't very good. So I was watching it and I really wished I'd done the footsteps for it, because they would have sounded so much better. But that's a great program and it sounds lovely. And so does Picard.
Thank you. So Jason is asking a question about Wallace and Gromit 2005. Are there any key differences to providing audio for a stop motion animation versus a more regular live action movie?
Only in as much as you can be slightly more comedic in the sounds that you're making, because although Wallace and Gromit, it's a dog, and it's stop motion. They're kind of represented as humans, And so Wallace is walking, Gromit, sorry, is walking on his back feet most of the time. So we treated most of the sound effects like you would a normal film, but you do have license to be funnier, and you do have license to make some more kind of classic boings and twings and spring noises that go with animation and go with that kind of feel to the film. But generally, we would hit it in the same way as we would a normal film. An animated character still needs the same dynamics, still needs the same moves, still needs the same footstep kind of characteristics as a non-animated character. But yeah, with animation, cartoons and things, you can just afford to be a little bit more fun. And obviously, if the viewing audience is younger, then even the sillier you can get. So the poots and the squelch machines come out, things like that. So.
That's great. So we've got about 10 minutes left. We've got quite a few more questions here. One from Alon is about your shoes. So how many types of shoes do you suggest to have in one's Foley bag as a strict minimum?
Right. Well, I would say you're going to need 2 types of shoes. You're going to need a kind of period drama set and a modern drama set. I would say maybe 3 pairs of period heels, 3 pairs of modern heels, women's shoes, 3 pairs of hard leather men's shoes, but stay away from too much vintage, because the leather soles create sparks and transients on the dust. So a modern pair of hard leather shoes, because they might have a rubberized sole, would be better. 3 pairs of men's shoes, 3 pairs of women's shoes, maybe a couple of pairs of character shoes, and then maybe a couple of pairs of odd ones. A few pairs of trainers, definitely for a modern drama, and then maybe some odd things like flip-flops, or you could have a pair of flippers in your bag as well. Maybe 10 to 15, tops 20 to be carrying around, because that's pretty much a full suitcase full of shoes. Personally, I've probably got about 150, 200 different pairs of shoes, but I don't take those everywhere I go. I know what the project is I'm going to work on, and then I take a set of shoes to go with the project. And then if I haven't brought enough for characters, I bring in more. That's great.
Sounds like Clarks are probably your best friend.
They are. In fact, Harry Potter, every film you had a lovely pair of Clarks hush puppies on. So it was a great advert for Clarks.
Fantastic. Got a good point here from Nick, who's saying, as we all know, sound really makes a film. But that said, does it ever irk you as a Foley artist that Foley artistry is a virtually unknown discipline from the general public?
No, it doesn't irk me, because for a long time, obviously, and I made a film called The Secret World of Foley. But we're in the 21st century now, and nothing's a secret anymore. And actually, as I've grown and as I've got older, and I'm now towards the end of my career, I really don't want it to be a secret anymore. I want the information that I've learned over the past 30 years to be given away. And so I'm very open to it being a very open kind of education, and a very open knowledge within the film industry. I hope that the more people know about the tricks that we use in film, I hope it doesn't spoil their interaction with film, because obviously that kind of entertainment is actually all about us being able to suspend disbelief and keep our disbelief suspended. So any sounds that don't quite work there and might trigger you back into reality aren't good sounds.
Okay, thanks for that. Michael, interestingly, says, when you first began learning the art of Foley, did you have space at your home where you lived, or did you have to always go somewhere else?
No, but I would practice at home. I'd stick EastEnders on the television, and I'd walk people around the square. But I practiced like all the time. I was obsessed. And so I did become completely obsessed with practice, because certainly to be a Foley artist, you have to practice and practice and practice. So everywhere I went, if I was walking down the street, I'd pick somebody, maybe 10 people ahead of me, and I'd sync myself up with them, and I would walk behind them. You can't really do that too close to people, because you're a bit like a stalker. So I would leave a little bit of a gap, or I'd sit on a tube station, and I'd be sat down, and I'd walk my feet in time with people walking up and down. And while I was doing that, also, I was thinking about the different sounds that people made when they were carrying shopping, or whether they were, had a heavy rucksack, or whether they were in a rush, or whether they were having an argument. I'd find those people within a crowd, and I'd try and listen to the noises that they were making, so I could learn to differentiate between just making somebody walk down the platform and somebody struggling down the platform, and then try and remember those moments when I came to re-perform them if they ever appeared in a scene.
Great. Arbett's got a nice honest question here, referencing to the fact what you said earlier, that often it's about, in any industry, it's about who you know and being in the right place at the right time. Well, what he's asking is, what do you need in your portfolio to effectively apply as a Foley artist? What's going to give you the edge, in essence, to show off to a potential employer?
Well, I mean, this is why I keep talking about practice, because it's very difficult for anybody to walk into a studio and say, I'm a Foley artist, unless they're already very well practiced. So I wouldn't ever try and sell yourself as a Foley artist until you're fairly good at doing it. A lot of Foley artists are born out of other jobs within the industry. So if you are wanting to become a Foley artist, maybe actually look at some of the other jobs that you can do within a studio to get you in the door, or practice. I mean, really practice. And then approach the studios, tell them that you're an aspiring Foley artist, that you're needing to spend time with, watching a Foley artist at work. This was one of the things actually that I found not distressing, but just difficult. When I was working the whole time in a studio, it was very difficult to invite students or anybody that was interested in sound to come into the studio and actually watch me work. Now, you can get an understanding of what I'm doing and why we're doing it, but I never really had the opportunity to explain how you move your ankles and how you move around the surface to actually create the sound. So research, go onto YouTube, watch every video you possibly can. There's some great videos out there, particularly from the States. Watch The Secret World of Foley over and over again. Practice doing it. You can even perform to The Secret World of Foley and get those skills and your timing up, so that when you do eventually stand in front of somebody and you're saying that you are aspiring and you have practiced, you're not just stood there flapping around not knowing what you're doing. You do have a reasonable understanding of the process, and you are already practiced. It's so important that that first run of feet that you do in a studio are in sync and have character. Otherwise, you will not be asked back again. So it is about being prepared. You have to be so close to being a Foley artist before you get your first gig as a Foley artist. Very difficult thing. And unfortunately, there is no training to show you those techniques.
Yeah.
Very difficult job to get into.
So we want to keep this to time. So we will have time for a few more questions in a moment, but perhaps you could say a few words about the Foundations of Foley course that you're going to be running in conjunction with SAE next year, just in case people have to log off at 7 o'clock.
Okay, well, yes. I mean, everything that I've talked about this evening will be taught in the Foundations of Foley course. Now, like I said earlier, one of the things that I regretted was not being able to spend the time with people in my career to actually really impart some of those basic fundamental practices that you have to go through in order to get your muscle memory together, in order to be able to work in sync and really read body movement. And that's what this course is going to be about. It's very physical. It's not about recording. It's not about what objects you use. It's about getting you as a student into a place where Foley is almost subconscious to you. So we're going to learn those practice processes, and we're going to practice them every day together. The course is 4 weeks, and it's 4 days a week. It's still not long enough, really, unfortunately, to turn you into a Foley artist. At the end of the course, you're still going to need a lot more practice. But I think for you as a student, you will have a very clear understanding of what you need to do. And it will probably make the difference between whether you're going to have the stamina to continue the practicing and into a career, or whether you're going to give it up. The other thing that the course is going to do, because it's open to anybody, It's open to everybody that's interested in post-production sound and wants to gain some of those little Foley skills. So game audio technicians and engineers and designers are very, very welcome too. I think for them, more so than somebody that's aspiring to be a Foley artist, they're going to come off this course really understanding how to create assets and really understanding the performance needed for cinematics. We're going to cover just about everything. We will be doing violence. We will be doing moves, how to create movement and dynamics with cloth and with accessories, how to create violence within its classification. So an 18 film is going to be a lot more violent with a lot more blood compared to a 12 or a PG. So we'll be discussing all of those kind of things. And also a little bit about external stimuli and why we react the way we do to certain sounds, and why we use the different elements in sound in film to inspire us to believe and to empathize and to absolutely become part of the narrative and the story. It's going to be very exciting.
That's really good. So there will be details about the course being emailed to everybody that's taken part in this Zoom call tonight. The first course is going to be run from London, our London campus, but the hope is that there will be future dates around the UK and actually around Europe. So we've got a couple more minutes just to take a last few questions. So I've got one here from Anay asking for an example, if this is possible. How often do you have to layer different vague sounds to create one cohesive, meaningful one? And would you mind providing us with a really weird example? Which completely put you on the spot.
Yeah, I haven't really got a weird example, but I mean, often we have to layer up lots of different sounds. There's nothing really on the table that because this is, like I said, it's a very generic Foley bag. So this is more accessories and things like that. But if we were doing a piece of machinery, for instance, we would probably layer that up, do some mechanical bangs, some cogs, some, a conveyor belt, and layer up the sounds that way. Lots and lots of sounds have to be layered up. Again, like the talking about some of the creatures earlier on, for the Kelpie, we did maybe 3 or 4 tracks of seaweed reacting to the water, and then 3 or 4 tracks of just the water splashing on its own. And then they were all layered together to create the overall sound. I haven't really got anything on here because it's even like the snow bag. I can't really show you what the snow bag would sound like because I haven't got a pile of snow to go with it. So I'm sorry about that. That's a question more for a studio setup rather than a table setup.
I think so. Aaron's asking on the topic of field Foley, do you have a favorite portable recording device?
I don't actually know, because again, I've stayed away from the technical side of things. I could tell you about a couple of mics, but you can look them up yourself. No, I tend not to pay any attention to what's going on technically around me, and I concentrate solely on what I'm doing, on my performance. Although I do know what's happening within the studio as far as sound's concerned, I would leave the outside recording to a recordist. And I've never really been that interesting where I kind of go, oh, what make is that? And what are the initials on it? I'm sorry, I'm not a technician.
And just going back to the Foley bag, we've talked about shoes, but for someone starting out, what are the absolute essentials that you need to have in that Foley bag?
Well, again, think about the things that you're going to be asked to do. So obviously you need shoes. You're going to be asked to create costumes and fabrics and things. So a little selection of costumes. Man-made ones sound better, but nylon ones are necessary for the 21st century. So I have a little collection of probably not much more than this. I've got a nylon jacket, a couple of cotton things, and a day glow jacket. But the things that you'd be looking for would be accessories, really. A watch, some smoking things, some keys, sunglasses, things that you would carry on you, things that you would have in your pockets, or things that you would have in your bags as a first thing to have in your bag. So rather than plates or knives and forks and things that you'd probably be able to get from a studio, have things that are really connected to the actor And then once you've got those things, and have, again, 2 sets, the same with the shoes. So have a purse like this, which would be more of an old-fashioned purse with a nice clip, as well as having a fabric wallet with a bit of Velcro in there for a more modern kind of wallet. So think on those lines, period and modern. And then, like I said, just accessories. Or if you find things in your process as you're picking things up and you're hearing them, and you decide that, oh, wow, that really sounds like, I don't know, a glasses case, but actual fact is it's something completely different, then pop that in your bag, because it's a sound that you found and you'll always be comfortable using it because it's your prop and it's your sound. So I hope that answers your question. Keep it to the things that are going to be attached to the actors and the things that they're going to pick up. A little bit of stationery, a little bit of equipment, but generally phones, fags, keys, that kind of thing.
This is really good. We get some really great questions here. So we're just down to the last 2 now. We're just over the hour. So these last 2 are really asking about films that you've worked on. One is Baby Driver, on its release, was commended for its sound design and is one of the things that Elliot loves about the film. Can you speak a little about the process on capturing car driving audio?
Well, car driving audio obviously is not a Foley thing. So what we did, the wonderful thing about Baby Driver is everything had to be set to music. So for the Foley artists, we wore headphones and we recorded everything in time to music. The car stuff, certainly when Baby was drumming the car, the steering wheel and on the side, that was just too complicated and too musical and too rhythmic for me to perform. I mean, it would have taken me days to rehearse that, just him using the car as a drum. So what I did do was drum the steering wheel, drum the bonnet of a car, drum the door of a car, drum the seat of a car, and then I handed that over to the sound designers. And they cut that to pieces and they made this musical drumming with all the different aspects of the sound. The whole film was guided by the music of the film. The cars, you'd probably have to speak to a sound designer, but everything was done. I would have thought they would have done similar things to the way we did with the sound effects and the footsteps, and some of the sound effects were recorded in the key of the music that was being played, so they didn't interfere. And that's the most important thing when you're working with music in that way, that you're not recording things that are going to interfere with the music. Your footsteps are not crossing the beat, and it doesn't interfere with the original piece of music. You know, if somebody was banging something on the table and it was out of time with the music, it might just not make the music as effective as it would be. So I hope that answers your question.
Doesn't. The last example, again, my pronunciation here, Ex Machina. How did you create the balance between human and bionic sounds for Ava's character?
Well, through, again, a lot of experiment. No, we didn't take responsibility for Eva's internal workings. That was done by somebody else. But we decided actually that for her general movements, she would sound human. So we didn't do a kind of glazed aspect to her robot parts. We let them just be, and we gave her human feet, and we gave her normal skin when she touched her face. And the whole point of Eva was that she was so close to being unrecognizably not human that the only reason we knew she was a robot is because she was introduced to us in that way to begin with. So we didn't want to make her sound too robotic. We really wanted to make her sound almost finished. And again, one of the really interesting things about that film was it was more the environment that they were in that was important to get right than it was Eva. Obviously, when Eva was replacing her skin, then we used lots of different things to try and make that almost popping sound. It almost looked like bubble wrap that she was placing back onto her. You know, the skin was attaching her to her in that way. So we used lots of things. There was like a piece of Pirelli that we used that I would strum my fingers along to get that popping sound. Or certainly if she was touching her own body, we used skin. So yeah, we didn't over concentrate on making her sound robotic.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, the last question, and I think this is on a lot of people's minds, given your long career. Are there any films or games that you've seen where the sounds have simply eluded to you and you're thinking, how on earth did they come up with that?
Yeah, loads. Yeah, loads. I mean, just as an example, I talked about this the other day, actually, to somebody. The final, in fact, it's not even the final sequence because it's more or less the whole film, the Marvel series, and that Endgame. It's almost this huge battle with these unbelievable amount of characters in these outrageous costumes. Some of them are monsters, some of them are huge, some of them are little, some of them are in metal. And I did look at that scene and just went, wow, how did they even begin to approach it? You know, there's so much content in there. So yeah, there are. So the Marvel films are a beautiful example of like loads and loads of sound that is needed, and then all of it kicking off at the same time. Amazing films, an amazing soundscape.
Fantastic. And thank you to everyone for submitting questions. We've really had lots of questions. It's been such an interesting evening. So really it just stands to me to thank you, Pete, for being so generous with your time. It's been a really good evening. Thank you for everybody attending. And just a reminder that you will receive an email after this with more information about the short course that we've referenced. And I would encourage people also just to take a moment to look at the SAE Extra section of the website to see other speakers that we've got coming up. It's all open to the public. So thank you, Pete. Thank you for your time, everybody. And hopefully we'll see you at another SAE Extra soon. Thank you.
On the course.